Welcome back to Getting to Know You. We've had a lull because of camera issues and COVID issues, and now we're back to the real thing. This idea was developed by Betty Osan, who felt, although we live in this community, we, with playing bridge or having lunch, don't necessarily talk about the things that would be important for people to know. So we developed this program called Getting to Know You, and this is the first one in a long time. And we have Emily from Activities, who's going to be our producer, and so here we have Lois Friend, who's been willing to be interviewed, and I think we're ready to go.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And I want to thank Sharon for all the work that she does to prepare for this. I know she interviewed my husband, Larry Welch, several weeks ago, and Larry has encouraged me to get involved as well. Our lives cross a lot, but they're very different too, and Larry has encouraged me to be as independent as possible. So if he complains about that, I remind him that's why he married me, because I was independent. So if we go back a few years, I grew up in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
I have an older sister who is now living at Sagewood, and I have a twin sister who is living in Sun Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't see each other a lot, but we communicate via text or email
Mm-hmm.
quite often, so we keep it up with each other's families.
And speaking of family, you have 3 children, right?
That's right. That's right. I do. If I go back, to my bringing up, I was raised in the Midwest, in Indianapolis and in Milwaukee. And if I go back to what made an impression during those years, I would say I was a very outdoor person, and we did a lot of traveling to all the state parks in Indiana. Those people that are here probably know them: Turkey Run, Brown Deer, Pokagon, McCormick's Creek State Park, where we stayed summers, and that's where I learned to swim. And swimming has played a very prominent role in my life.
Mm-hmm.
As a youngster, I was on a swim team. That started some of my competitiveness. I was a backstroker, and I lettered at the Indianapolis Athletic Club. And what I remember about that is after school, I would take a bus down to the Indianapolis Athletic Club, and that was mainly a men's club.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I went there, or my mother went there, we had to go in the back door. But that was fun, and I competed in swimming till I was about 12 when we moved
Mm-hmm.
from Milwaukee.
Mm-hmm.
To Milwaukee. I was a mid-termer starting school in January. So when we moved, my sister and I took a bunch of tests, and they moved us ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So I often wondered what would have happened if one of us moved ahead and one of us behind.
What's your speculation?
I don't have one. I will tell you a funny story. When we were taking classes at ASU, we had the same professor, different sections, and they posted our scores by Social Security number. There were like 800 points on this test, and we both got the same score. Don't remember what it was, but out of 800 points, that was pretty remarkable. We were fairly similar, I think, in intellect. I was probably the harder worker.
Mm-hmm.
All my life, my philosophy has been to do my personal best.
Mm-hmm.
So I was probably the overachiever.
Well, you certainly practice that in terms of do your personal best. Around here, you've been very, very active, and reading your activities is exhausting in terms of all the things you did. And I'd say you're a competitor and a collaborator.
Well, thank you. I would hope so. I've just been very fortunate in being able to do almost anything I wanted to do. My health has allowed me to do that, and I have always had plenty of energy.
Mm-hmm.
So I managed to keep busy and enjoy the activities. I started playing tennis when we moved to Milwaukee. And of course, my twin sister played also. Our personalities came out in our tennis because she was the aggressive tennis player and I was the finesse tennis player. And I still play that way to this day. I'm still playing tennis in a group here. Ted Crow was in a group when we moved in here 6 years ago, and it was a men's group, and Larry played in that group, and one time he couldn't play, and he couldn't find a sub, so I went, and that's how I got myself into the group. So they just treat me like one of the guys, but I'm left-handed, and sometimes they tell me to put my left hand in my pocket. And they never know whether I'm going to drop a ball or lob it. And I claim that there's always a third of the court, even in doubles, that's not covered. And that's where I hit the ball, put them on the defense. So that's my strategy to this day.
And I think you still belong to that the gambling group, the card group.
The poker group?
Yeah, the poker group.
Yes.
Yes.
I do
Okay.
belong.
So-
Larry and I split up a poker slot. And
Okay.
my claim to fame is that I got a straight flush.
Mm-hmm.
And Roy, who runs the group, said we need to take a picture of that. So they did. And I posted it on Facebook, and I sent it to my children. And my son-in-law wrote back and said, "There's one chance in 21,000 that you would get that hand." So I think I made all of $1.25 on that hand.
Oh, wow.
But it was a fun hand. They thought I should go to the casino, but I'm not going to venture there. I know what my chances are, and I don't think it'll happen again in my lifetime.
You also had a very interesting father.
My father was an insurance salesman, and my mother and my father lived at Royal Oaks in Sun City. He was there when Westminster opened, and he helped to establish many of the things that happen here at Westminster happen also at Royal Oaks. One of the differences is he was very active in their foundation, and they have one of the biggest foundations in the valley with nonprofits.
Wow.
And if there was one thing that I would like to do in my lifetime is to become involved with our endowment
Mm-hmm.
and work on that. My father was particularly interested in the charitable tax annuities that you can do during your lifetime and get a interest back on that donation that's pretty sizable. And today, with today's interest rates, to get 8% or 9%, it's a pretty good deal. And I would just like to be able to inform residents that that is available
Mhm.
to them. So I'm working right now with the board to see if I can become a part of that.
Mhm. That would be wonderful. And I know finances is a special interest of yours. You read the Wall Street Journal and you keep abreast.
I do. I do. I taught for 25 years, but during that period of time, I took investment classes. I ran some family trusts that were involved with managing buildings and investing money. So probably from the 80s, I have been very involved with investments. I do read the Wall Street Journal. I try to read it every day. The Cambios here are very helpful as they let me take their old journals, so I have continual old journals in my apartment to read. So I never lack for reading material. And I have run my own investments since the 80s. I keep thinking I'd like to give that up, but I haven't. The trouble is when you know a little bit, it's hard to turn it over to somebody. And I guess I don't have any reason to do that right now, but I know I need to have a plan.
And if your dad were alive, would the two of you collaborate?
Well, we weren't always on the same page with investments because I took an investment class, and the final question on it, what does it mean to say buy term insurance and invest the rest? Okay, my father was a whole life insurance person, so he wasn't heavily into the stock market like I was. And I used to ask him what I should do when I had a broker way back then, and he'd always say no. So finally I realized that he just didn't trust the market at all. So that part of our life we didn't share very much. I finally said to Larry, I know you don't approve of this, but please don't tell my father where I'm investing.
That was a secret.
Right. But he had, he was a great salesperson, and he could get people at Royal Oaks to invest their estate when they died to Royal Oaks. And, I believe their endowment is, in the millions.
Thanks to your dad.
So, yes.
And you'd like to be the daughter of that for Westminster Village.
Yes. Bud Hart knew my dad. He could even tell some of the jokes that my father told. I need to practice that. I wasn't the joke teller, Dad was.
And you also are a large collector of beautiful Indian art that Westminster Village gets to enjoy.
That is true. Early in the 80s, we had a couple professor friends at NAU, and they worked with the Hopis and the Navajos. And we made frequent trips to the reservation, and those were in the days when you could go into people's homes, you could go on the first mesa, you didn't need a guide, you could go to all the dances. And before I got involved with Larry, he was into a lot of the art, and then it was an interest that we both shared. So we always went to the Heard Art Museum, and we established a collection. People that come to our apartment think our apartment looks like a museum.
Oh, you've got the cutest storyteller ever.
Oh, I know. I think we should put your name on the bottom of that.
It's
We
so
were
cute.
We were into storytellers because I was a teacher for 25 years, and we were into kasharis, which are the clowns. That's what's the name for the clowns. We also had a lot of Indian, other than pottery and baskets and rugs. We had a lot of paintings by Indian artists. So particularly when we closed up our Prescott house that we had had for 30 years, we brought all that art down here, and that was simultaneous with the new carpet going in on our floor. And Leslie Midcalf was very busy at that time, and she would usually want to approve what we were hanging in the hallway. And finally, that got to be a bit much for her, so she just sort of turned it over to us. So we tried to accommodate other people living on the floor as well, but we tried to establish a Southwest art display.
Yes, I live on the third floor, and I will often tell people it's like going to the Heard Museum because of all the beautiful art that you have shared with us on the third floor.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We finally had to stop buying art because we simply don't have a place for it. And we did donate some pieces that are in the library
Beautiful
now
pieces.
To Westminster, and we'll probably donate more. Many of those paintings now are still ours, but we've told our children they're not to take anything off the wall that they can't hang in their homes. So we expect that most of that artwork will remain there. There are a couple beautiful pictures of Sedona up there. I
Yes,
don't know
there
whether
are.
you have seen those.
Yes.
Those come from my folks.
And the carpet I like too. Pretty carpets.
So it's bright. If we ever see a new person coming by with marketing, Larry will tell them about the art. And one person said, "Oh, to walk out of your room and walk down this hall must be really exhilarating every time you go out."
I agree. And I'll go out of my way to take that back elevator so that I can walk through the Westminster Heard Museum.
So, well, Larry's looking for more paintings because somebody down your way says some of them disappeared when somebody moved.
Yes.
And that you need some more artwork. So
We do.
we need to get busy. But we don't have any more houses to sell, so.
So, and how knowledgeable are your children on Indian art and Indian customs?
One of our children has probably as much Indian art as we do. But our other children are not that interested in the Indian art. I think that generation, well, I don't know whether Indian art is still going up in price now or not, because the younger people do not have the involvement in Indian art that our generation did. So I'm not sure what will happen. But that's why we are very fortunate in having Westminster. And we've been able to get other artists that we have, whose work we have, to donate to Westminster. Some very lovely paintings. So
And framings. The framings are beautiful too.
Yes, and that's down by the G elevator and their batiks, and it's just amazing to imagine that this woman, Marilyn Solomon, can make these batiks.
And that's the elevator I use the most, so I always look and I'm amazed at the framings because they're beautiful.
Good. Well, we are certainly glad to share, because I'm not sure what we would have done when we bought our place in Prescott 30 years ago. The first thing we did was we got a U-Haul and we filled it with 22 paintings.
Mhm.
And we drove up there, and within a weekend, we had those paintings hanging. Now, we bought the place furnished. So suddenly,
Mhm.
this place was ours
Uh-huh.
with all these paintings.
Uh-huh.
We gradually replaced all the furniture. But the things that we mostly enjoyed up in Prescott were the activities of the Native Americans at the Charlotte Hall
Mhm.
and activities on the square.
Mhm.
We were also really involved in antiques. And this is a picture of our A-frame in Prescott. It's in the snow. So we went up, we spent, even when we moved into Westminster, we spent about 4 or 5 months there in the summer.
Mhm.
But we did go up at other times also. So out of this A-frame, we faced to the northeast, and we could see the San Francisco peaks.
Mhm.
So we had a beautiful view of the San Francisco peaks in Yavapai Hills in Prescott. And Prescott was kind of the antique capital of
Mhm.
Arizona.
Yes, right.
So we sold our place 2 years ago, and other than the paintings that we were able to bring down here, we had a lot of antiques. We had all our teaching materials that we had saved, maybe for some great-grandchildren, and we still don't have any great-grandchildren. So the real giving away things came at that time, not when we moved into Westminster. Whatever we didn't know what to do with, we took to Prescott. So we had a lot of things in Prescott. But once we took care of that, we adjusted and
Mhm.
realized that was a time in our life that was gone now.
Except for the memories.
That's true.
And you also taught in Phoenix
In Scottsdale.
and Scottsdale. And personally, I would, if we could go back in time, I'd love to be a third grader in your class. I think it would be so fun.
Well,
Because-
I did have a lot of fun. I'm not sure we'd be at Westminster if I didn't start teaching when I did. Not that my retirement is so great, but it does, my pension does help. But I ran into a teacher before school started in 1975, who my children have had. And she looked just terrible. And I said to her, Elaine, I will come in and help you when you start teaching. I'm not signed up to sub. I had gone back and gotten my teaching credential at ASU. School started, and the first week the district called me, said, would you please come in and sign up to teach? Elaine would like you to take her class. Well, I did that, not at all realizing this was going to be permanent. She died within a month, and I took over her class. I'm not sure how I managed this because I was still running the family. My girls were heavily involved in gymnastics. They later both went to college on gymnastics scholarships. So it was a matter of getting them to their gymnastic lessons every evening. I was taking classes for my master's. But I did take her class, and I stayed teaching. Now that was at Kiva on McDonald. I stayed in teaching for the next 25 years, not without some problems. That there was declining enrollment at that time, and every year for 10 years, I was riffed. And if you don't know what that word means, it means reduction in force. So I was riffed in the spring when contracts went out, and in September or late August, I would be reassigned. And I never knew what school, and I never knew what grade level I was going to teach. But they pretty much kept me between first and fourth. And, but I didn't teach third, so you wouldn't have been in my third grade class.
And then I'd like to be in fourth grade.
I love the content area in fourth. But I had to be very flexible. The only thing I could take with me from classroom to classroom were my books. So I went to every garage sale and collected books. I went to Friends of the Library and collected books. So when I retired, I had boxes and boxes and boxes of books that I gradually gave away. And in fact, Westminster has, at least Marilyn was going to make a children's section and put some of my books. I believe I've even given you some books.
You have.
For your
Grandson.
grandson. I ended up, after all these years of being riffed, I ended up at Pueblo School, which is not very far from Westminster. It's next to Saguaro High School, near Lincoln and Hayden. So it's very close.
And you also had a friendly newspaper, right?
That's right. That's right. I published that in my classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Computers came in the early 80s, so I started teaching in 75. And I would have my children write of their own experiences. Early in the year, I had to keep them in at recess one at a time to have them read it to me because I couldn't read all they'd written. But I published this, and they took it home, the newspaper home, and it was their words, and that became their reading homework. So I did that.
And they were to read it to their parents.
That's right, or the parents would read it to them, whatever worked. But it was the children's words, and that was very effective. I probably used the computer more than any other teacher in class, because any sentences the children wrote, anything they did, I would rewrite, and I would make them into books like this. I would laminate these books and put them in a spiral. It'd become a take-home book, and they would take that home as part of my library. They would take it home and read it.
I hear a lot of dedication and loyalty. Those are words that I would place to describe you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Dedicated, loyal, and a very good
Thank
friend.
you. My goal in my classroom was for everyone to learn something every day. Now, when they came in from kindergarten, they were used to getting everything right all the time. And I told them, if you're getting everything right all the time, you're probably not learning a whole lot. So it's okay to get something wrong. But if I had a discipline problem, I usually looked at the curriculum, and either the curriculum was too hard for the child or it was too easy, and I would adjust the curriculum. Each child had their own work to do after their assignments were completed. And so I had children going in every direction, and I wasn't the greatest disciplinarian. My rule was, if you're keeping someone off task, you better stop what you're doing. And if they don't stop what they're doing, they are told to go to the wall, and when they can go back and get on their own projects and not keep someone else off task. They are free to go back at their own will.
Mhm.
Uh,
And if your children were here, would they say you were not a strong disciplinarian either? Or would they have known a different mom?
Well, I was kind of in the middle. I had, with my two sisters, one of my sisters was very strict. One of my sisters, who, I'm trying to think of what she got her doctorate in, whether it was home ec or, anyway, she was in psychology. She was very permissive.
Mhm.
And I was kind of right
In the
in the middle.
Mhm. Oh.
So I kind of have two of my lives with Larry Friend, who I married and had 3 children with. And he was a great adventurer, and he sailed to Hawaii with our son in the mid-70s
Mhm.
in a 25-foot sailboat. So this was pretty risky.
Yes.
He did a lot of
Even
very,
today.
yes, very risky things. Fortunately, they arrived in the Hawaiian Islands at Kauai at the same time that the girls and I arrived by plane. It took them 2 weeks, and then coming back, it took them 3 weeks. He continued his adventurous modes, and this was not too conducive to family living.
Mhm.
He eventually went to live on a boat that, and we went our separate ways. We were divorced. By this time, I was teaching, and he left to go on many adventures. And unfortunately, soon after, he was killed in an accident, in a head-on collision in Ramona, California.
Mhm.
And here he had done all these very risky adventures. He'd driven to Baja before there was a road. He did a lot of motorcycling. So you just can't predict what can happen. And I was taking classes, as all teachers do, to move up the pay scale. And I would go to class in my tennis clothes, and Larry Welch was teaching the class.
Mhm.
So he not only taught math, he taught teachers classes,
Mhm.
communication classes, study skills classes. So that's how we met. I took
Mhm.
his class. I was running the tennis in Who's Who. I invited him to play tennis, thinking he looked more like a football player than a tennis player, but turns out he was a very good tennis player. And so we had many tennis dates.
Mhm. And I know you have a very special racket that I don't want you to
Oh,
forget.
oh yes, this is my Billie Jean racket, which I had it would be in the 70s, when Billie Jean was at the top of her game.
Mhm.
Now, Pamela Penn gave me the book right off the press of Billie Jean,
Mhm.
and I have read it, and it's a great book. It's not only about what she did for women's tennis, but what she did for the women's movement,
Mhm.
what she did for the LBGT group, and it was a very interesting book to read.
Mhm.
I can't even compare my tennis with hers. I have seen her play. Her parents lived in Prescott.
Oh, my
And I've
goodness.
seen her play at,
Mhm.
just volley, but there was no doubt when I saw her she was a pro at the Prescott Racket Club.
Uh-huh.
So that was fun. But I have a great appreciation for these pro tennis players, because they not only have to have continual lessons after lessons. I can probably count on my hand 5 times I've had a private tennis lesson. I've had lots of clinics, but no private tennis lessons. They not only have to do that, they have to have their sports psychologist. There are probably 3 things that go into their tennis: their skill, their ability that they were born with, their lessons, and their motivation. And to keep that going is really hard. And I think back to Djokovic recently losing the calendar slam and to beat Nadal and Federer's record, what he must be going through psychologically, or what Osaka went through psychologically. But I've kept this Billie Jean King racket, and it's a little warped. It used to be in a press, but it's in our living room as a remembrance. I have a much larger racket now, and when I retired, I went immediately into daytime tennis, and I played in the leagues all over the valley, in Interclub League, and I ran an ATA league.
And you still play regular tennis?
Yes, I play in the group that I mentioned previously that Ted Crow was in. We play up on Thunderbird and 60 and 92nd, and over at Aztec Park. So I still enjoy that. I'm not the fastest person on the court, but I'm probably pretty much the oldest one on the court.
And also the cleverest one on the court.
Well, I try to be. I do, one of the things I do here at Westminster is I do their exercise classes. Not so much the live ones, but I do the online ones with Kelly, because I feel I have to do something else to keep myself in shape in order to play tennis. And there was, when I retired, I want to mention another person here, Kotzie Wheeler, who passed away, was the librarian at my school. We did color coding to decide what kind of personality we were. And I went into the gold group, and Kotzie kicked me out. She said, "You belong in the blue group." Now, the blue group was the problem-solving group, and she said, "You're always solving problems with teachers and teachers, teachers and parents, kids and kids." So when I retired, it was really because of her doing that. I went into volunteer court mediation, and I did that for quite a few years in the Superior Court, where people in cases of 10,000 or less had to go to mediation before they went to court. And we had landlord-tenant cases, sending illegal faxes. If you were in an accident, how much money do you get for pain and suffering? Those kinds of things. So I really enjoyed that, because that was mainly the whole philosophy behind that was that the plaintiff and defendant knew more about the case than the judge, and that you were much better solving it yourself than going before the judge. And I did it with my grandchildren, and I told them if they couldn't solve their problems, they were going in front of the judge, and their judge was going to be their mother or father.
And would they solve their problem?
They did.
Did any of your children or grandchildren take an interest in tennis?
No, my girls were gymnasts. They went to college on gymnastics scholarships, one to Stanford, one to Oral Roberts. Amy's in great shape because she works out at 4:30 in the morning. Now she does that, and then she doesn't go to work anymore. She works for SRP, but she was up watching me play tennis in Prescott. And she's got a great body, and the people said, Amy, do you play tennis? And she put her hands on her hips and she said, I don't do anything that involves a ball. So no, I could not. The gymnastic coach at the high school was also the tennis coach. He couldn't teach they had no coordination for tennis. But they could walk a beam, and they could do an aerial on a beam. They could do a handstand on the bars, but no.
They kept that your territory.
That's right. They were never tennis players. And my parents never supported my tennis. When my mother was 98, she says to me, she's in the care center at Royal Oaks, and she says, Lois, I have never seen you play tennis. And I said, well, we'll have to do something about that. So I got a picture, put it on my computer, and I took it in to her, and I said, here I am playing tennis.
And do you think she just didn't understand the game or didn't like the sport? What kept her from watching you?
I'm not sure. She just, my mother really was not real well when I was
Was she a bridge player?
growing up. Was she what?
A bridge player?
She was a bridge player.
Okay.
And when we went on camping trips, I've played bridge since I was in my teens.
Mm-hmm. And you still do?
So I still do. I run the bridge here, and I really enjoy it. My bridge is like my tennis. I haven't had many bridge lessons. I don't know the new conventions, but as long as my partner, which is usually Larry, understands what I'm doing, and he usually does because I've taught him everything he knows about bridge. we seem to get by all right.
Uh-huh. And have a good time.
That's right. That's the bottom line, to have a good time.
Well, you also went to Boston University, right?
I did. I went when I was graduating from high school. I decided to go in a different direction than my twin sister. My whole family, including my grandmother, had gone to DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana. So I went out to Grinnell. I was involved with Larry Friend at the time, who was at MIT. So I transferred to Boston University.
Mm-hmm.
And I went through college in 3 years. So I don't advise this at all, but I did it. And so I graduated when I was 20.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to mention one thing. First of all, since I brought these, I need to show them. My swimming of my 500 kids that I taught, this was my trademark. Now, these happen to be Clorox bottles. They're full, but they were empty. They have air in them. And the kids, the ages 3 to 5, would hold these. They could jump in with them. They could float on their back. They could float on their stomach. And I still run into children that I have taught to swim, and they remember the bottles. So that's what these bottles are. Empty, of course. I put the tops on really tight because the first thing a child wants to do is to take the top off, but then it's not a flotation device. So this is how I taught kids to swim. They could turn, they could jump in, they could bob up and down to practice their breathing. And I often thought I ought to market something similar, but I never got around to it.
Well, you still have time.
I'm not sure. I have taught, when I was still in Prescott, I taught some of the grandchildren of people that I taught to swim.
Mm-hmm.
So I had my water safety from the Red Cross for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And once I gave that up, in order to get it back, you have to go back and pass the life-saving class. And I taught tons of these, but I didn't want to have to go back and do that and jump off the 3-meter board and do things I had to do to pass the life-saving class. The other thing that I was known for around here at Westminster and by the way, we've lived here 6 years and we wouldn't change that at all, is when I moved in, I was making a lot of these purses.
Mhm.
And this is a rag purse. And I made a couple of these that I put in to be auctioned here at Westminster. It is reversible. And if you don't want the rag look, have all my props here, you can turn it over. And the pockets that were on the inside before are now on the outside. And you have a different look. So this is sort of my patriotic purse that I enjoyed. And the other thing, I made scarves for quite a few people here. And this is my chain scarf. This is knitted. And I wear this at Christmas time. And
Wow.
this is one thing that the gentlemen seem to comment about.
Mhm.
They must like this chain. It's knitted and then felted. And when you felt something, some of us have put something wool in the machine in hot water and it's automatically felted, which you didn't want to have happen.
Mhm.
It shrinks it. So you can now not tell this is knitted. These are 6.5-inch long straight pieces that I've sewed together. You can't see where I've sewed them together because I felted it. So those have been some of my projects that I have done.
Did you do projects with your children?
I taught the girls to knit.
Okay.
You know, my kids were so busy.